Welcome to Secondary Adaptations for Check-In, Check-Out, brought to you by Nebraska MTSS. My name is Jill Gunther, and I'm a Social Emotional Behavioral Learning Specialist with Nebraska MTSS, and I serve Region 3.
My name is Mackenzie Rydell, and I'm a Social, Emotional, and Behavioral Learning Specialist with Nebraska MTSS, and I serve Region 1.
Our learning objectives today include defining check-in, check-out, and identifying adaptations for high school implementation of check-in, check-out. This quote here really speaks to the importance of relationships and how important those relationships can be in transforming school climate and increasing student engagement. To begin with our first objective, check-in, check-out is an evidence-based practice for Tier 2 targeted supports. You can find additional information and research on our Nebraska MTSS website and program comparison tool. Why check-in, check-out? Research suggests that implementing check-in, check-out leads to positive outcomes such as increased adherence to behavior expectations, reduced office discipline referrals, and decreased rates of mild, low-level disruptive behaviors. Research also suggests that check-in, check-out may result in increased academic engagement and pro-social behaviors. Check-in, check-out helps provide structure to a student's day. It helps create accountability as well as promote internal motivation. When we think about social, emotional, behavioral specific skills, check-in, check-out can really help support improvements in those SEB skill areas, all while also helping to build relationships, to help improve attendance, and provide an increased sense of belonging. This intervention can also help to increase academic success, help to create a stronger home-school connection, and also aids in providing teacher feedback to both students as well as caregivers. Check-in, check-out is an extension of Tier 1 core supports. It's a targeted intervention for some students. It requires a low effort with high reward, extending opportunities to practice with increased teacher feedback. It's providing a positive and specific response to that desired behavior. This intervention is consistent for all students and is a way to prompt adults to really build that positive relationship with students. It's important to also note here that the daily progress report is a progress monitoring tool. It's not the intervention. What are some of those critical features of check-in, check-out? It's a data-based Tier 2 intervention, which includes a beginning as well as end-of-the-day check with a positive adult. This might also be a check-in each class period for some students. This contact is intentional and provides positive interaction and increased performance feedback throughout the day. Another critical feature includes that it's easy to start and do. When setting up this system, we want to ensure that we have clearly defined standard protocol for students both entering as well as exiting. This also allows for minimum effort for adults and maximum benefit for students. We want to ensure it's consistent with school-wide expectations, that we have a system for continuous progress monitoring, and that it's implemented uniformly by all staff. Check-in, check-out might be appropriate for students who show emerging or low-level concerns and display those concerns across multiple environments. They meet established decision rule criteria and benefit from increased adult interactions, require support for academic engagement, and need targeted SEB skills. An important reminder is that check-in, check-out is not just for students who meet criteria based on behavioral data. We also want to be looking to things like academic data and attendance data. We might also be looking at students who struggle with Tier 1 goals and behaviors. Things like little to no classwork participation or completion. things like difficulty with organization or time management skills, and things that where they may have needs in managing emotions, have needs in managing their focus, their attention, and staying on task. This intervention can also be particularly effective for freshmen and sophomores transitioning to high school. If you're just rolling out this intervention, it could be beneficial to really focus on a target population for your campus. In some instances of check-in, check-out, your school or your district may have identified a check-in, check-out coordinator. Here, we just want to touch on the role of the facilitator or the mentor. The check-in, check-out facilitator or mentor is at the heart of the intervention and can truly be any adult in the school building. The most important aspect of the intervention is the facilitator building that relationship with the student. This is done with the daily check-in and check-out. It's important for the facilitator to maintain the daily progress report and be sure to connect, recognize, and reinforce the student for their efforts. Facilitators also might communicate progress to the building coordinator if there's one identified. This is a helpful visual to reference that explains the check-in, check-out implementation process. Just a reminder that when you see DPR on this visual, that it stands for Daily Progress Report. When a student meets criteria for this intervention, you will use the Daily Progress Report to assess how students are responding to the intervention. A typical day of a student receiving the targeted support of check-in, check-out would begin with a morning check-in with their identified facilitator or mentor. Throughout the day, the student would receive increased positive and specific feedback from teachers and other staff members, and then have an afternoon checkout with their identified facilitator or mentor. The facilitator or mentor would share that progress monitoring data with the check-in, check-out coordinator, unless that is the role of the facilitator or mentor, as well as sharing that data with families and caregivers. As you saw in that last visual, we really want to have that open communication and collaboration and support those family and caregivers in providing encouragement and feedback at home as well. Our second objective identifies ways to adapt check-in, check-out for secondary. While the purpose of the evidence-based intervention remains the same from elementary to secondary, there are a number of ways that you could adapt it to better support the secondary students. There's a great resource linked on the slide that provides more detailed explanations, but we'll be exploring a few of the different ways identified here on adapting check-in, check-out at the secondary level. This includes adjusting the daily progress report, engaging student voice, making check-ins flexible, and personalizing home communication. Recommendations indicate that no more than 10 to 15 students per facilitator at the secondary level is what's recommended. Check-in, check-out implementation for secondary students can be more complex, but less time-intensive than preschool or elementary age populations, for a number of reasons, including that the peer attention may be more reinforcing than adult attention. Students are expected to self-manage both social as well as academic behaviors, and larger school size makes coordination among adults more complex. The first adaptation for check-in, check-out that we'll explore is making adjustments to the Daily Progress Report, or DPR. One way to adjust the Daily Progress Report is through self-monitoring. Students are taught to rate themselves at the end of each class on the school-wide behavior expectations prior to the teacher providing that rating. This can help encourage and facilitate that consensus and have those conversations around the student's daily performance, which is more developmentally appropriate for our secondary population. We've provided a few examples of self-monitoring DPRs. One was created with a bifold design that was aimed to provide more privacy for students when handling the card. The front of the folded card includes the school-wide expectations logo. The inside of the card includes the 5 school-wide expectations and a place for teachers and students to rate whether these expectations were met each period. You might also think about the size of the self-monitoring DPR at the secondary level. Might it work to maybe create the size of an assignment notebook so that it can be taped or stapled in the inside front cover? Might it be a similar in appearance to other sheets that might need to be signed off by staff? Things like that, thinking about the same color, the same size, the same shape as maybe like a participation eligibility card at the secondary level. Or even might be the same size of an expo marker so that it could easily fit into a pocket. To support that skill of self-management and make adjustments to the DPR at the secondary level, we really want to encourage students to be actively involved in the review of things like their check-in, check-out data, their assignment completion, their grades, their behavioral data, and overall attendance. We might also set up scaffolding supports with the DPR, similar to an I do, we do, you do model, where first the adult is modeling the review process, then the student is taking a more active role with the support and guidance from the adult. And then there's kind of the passing of the baton, where the student is able to really check and monitor that data independently.
Another way to adjust the daily progress report, or DPR, is combining social support with academic support to maintain engagement with school. Academic support includes providing instruction and feedback for basic study skills, such as using a planner, organizing materials and supplies, establishing and following a daily schedule, or work completion. High school staff could also focus on explicitly teaching these self-management skills, such as self-regulation, self-evaluation of behavior, organizational skills supporting the student schedule and activities, all things that increase the likelihood of students accomplishing academic goals and taking personal responsibility for their academic success. Here's an example of a daily progress report combined with academic support. ABC, or academic and behavior check-in, check-out. Academic behavior could look like work completion, writing assignments in a planner, coming to class, your grades, attending your tutoring sessions, and so on. This is an example of how the academic check-in, check-out might look. Keep in mind that a Tier 2 intervention is not individualized. This homework tracker is an example that reinforces student self-management and organizational skills. Some ways that we might digitize a daily progress report are through Google Docs, emails, or use of iPads. These are all examples of electronic substitutions for a hard copy daily progress report. Using digital DPRs can help with time constraints and workloads. Students and teachers can enter ratings into the digital application, and teachers can have the opportunity to enter specific typed comments that are visible to both students and the coordinator. It's important to remember that the true intervention is in the feedback and interactions between the staff and the student. While filling out the DPR provides data, it should be a reminder for students and for staff to provide that feedback and accountability with discussions and provide an opportunity for that positive student-adult interaction. One thing to consider is that without the need to complete a physical DPR at the end of a class, a positive interaction may not occur between a teacher and a student. But for the intervention to truly be done with fidelity, we need to ensure that these interactions occur. One way to do this is to have the student give a standard prompt to the teacher at the end of a class. This also helps students learn the skill of soliciting appropriate feedback. A second adaptation for secondary check-in, check-out is engaging student voice. As you might guess, research has found that students who were included in check-in, check-out reported more buy-in and follow-through. We want to think about ways to truly include students in decision-making processes. How might they be involved in reviewing the data, selecting incentives, or ways to be acknowledged? There are a number of free and cheap incentives that could be utilized for our secondary students. Things like assignment passes, admission to a sporting or social event, leaving class or school 5 minutes early, skipping the lunch line, earning extra credit opportunities, public acknowledgement, and so on. We might also include student voice when identifying the goals for students to work towards. When we think about building goals with students, they might decide what to work on, how to track teacher ratings, or reflect on strengths and changes that might be contributing to their success. Making check-ins flexible is another way to adapt check-in, check-out at the secondary level. Some ways to provide that flexibility for check-ins or checkouts might be allowing the students to check in with multiple staff members. Students might check in with their first period teacher and check out with their last period teacher. Students might check in with each teacher for each class period, or check in with one facilitator at the beginning of the day and another facilitator at the end of the day. Or there might even be a midday check with a facilitator around lunchtime. Perhaps students might even check in and check out with a coach or a sponsor for an extracurricular activity that they are involved in. Regardless of the flexibility with facilitators or mentors, it's still important to ensure that there's consistency in who is doing it. You want the same person for the check-in every day and the same person for the checkout every day. And you want to make sure that there's a plan in place if that person is absent. As you can see here, the goals of secondary and traditional check-in, check-out really are the same. Improve student success through better relationships with adults, and that is achieved by that interaction between the student and the teachers. But how that is achieved might look a bit different. Lastly, personalizing home communication is a secondary adaptation for check-in, check-out. It can be beneficial to provide surveys to parents or caregivers to see what communications they prefer, whether that be phone calls, emails, letters, apps like Remind, or other preferred methods. Sending parents and caregivers the physical daily progress report may also help streamline communication. It's important that those of us providing the check-in and check-out interventions are also providing support and guidance on what that feedback and encouragement might look and sound like at home, which can be an important component of personalizing home communication. To review our learning objectives, we defined check-in, check-out, and identified adaptations for high school implementation of check-in, check-out. Here we have provided some additional resources around check-in, check-out. NeMTSS also offers check-in, check-out training and implementation support. If you have any questions or would like additional information or implementation support, please do not hesitate to contact the NeMTSS implementation support team for your region. You can find contact information at the link shown here. Thank you, and be sure to reach out with any questions.